Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to the October edition of Molten Music Monthly. It's October, the nights are drawing in, it's feeling suspiciously warm, but maybe it's just all the fever that we're experiencing. But in this month's magazine of Moltenness, we have a little bit more music tech than we do modular. But it's all good, so let's get to it. Avid does the right thing with Pro Tools Free and then goes mad with the Mbox. PresSonus brings karaoke to Studio One. Bastl upgrades the Softpop while monolithing your Microgranny. Cherry Audio sees the signs. Moog listens to me about their cases. Modbap brings the colour. Nanobox brings the Razzmatazz. Bitwig makes some amends. Future Retro returns! Centrance has the best worst looking mixer. GP Audio actually runs a plugin in your video card. Exquis brings the button accordion to MPE. Korg listens to me about the SQ-64. Arturia has a synth, a controller, an audio interface and a grand piano. 4MS has been busy. Erica Synths completes the EDU DIY modular educational modular synth voice synth system. Akai adds CV to their MPK Mini. And Moogerfooger pedals become VST plugins. But first, Synthfest. Synthfest, we had it earlier in the month. It was a fantastic gathering of synthesizers, of people, of product, of gear, of music, of electrons, of intention, of control voltage, of MIDI, of big things, small things, tiny things, large things, all brought together in the Octagon at Sheffield. It was an exciting day. It was a day where I got the opportunity to speak to whole loads of people, to introduce myself, to say hello, to say thank you for stuff, and to go you're welcome to other stuff. It was a great day. We hadn't been there for a few years. The whole COVID thing had got in the way, of course, but coming back felt very, very right, very natural. It felt friendly and awesome. It felt cuddly and just a really very cool time. The other thing is that I didn't really get to experience anything particularly new. There were no breakthrough products, I don't think. There was no massive announcements or the coolest thing you could ever get to play on. However, there were a couple of things. There was the Rhodes. I got to play on the Mark 8 Rhodes, which was sublime. It was a beautiful thing. It was lovely. You felt a little bit exposed because it was in the main hall and everyone was kind of standing around you while you were going tinkly tink, 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 playing Riders on the Storm and such like. But it was still a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful instrument, and so much more so in the flesh. I mean, Rhodes have put out lots of pictures, but also lots of renders, which I don't think do them any favours. But somehow in 2D, when you see it flat on the page or in a web page, it looks slightly odd. But the reality of it in person is that it's just beautiful. I would love to have one. I would adore to have one. It would simply exist and exude coolness within whatever space you place it, and that's an awesome thing. The other thing I had a chance to play on was the OB8X thing, the Moog Big Oberheim, which was not as covered in knobs and bits and pieces as I thought. It's relatively calm. I mean, it's large. Everything is large. All the controls are large, but it's not overwhelming you with stuff. You just play it, and in fact you tend to focus on the presets a little bit. You go through those and then play with a bit of a filter. Sounded gorgeous. It just was not quite the intricate instrument that I was perhaps expecting. It's much simpler, much braver, perhaps courageous as a large format synthesizer. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting playing that, but again, extremely warm and awesome sound and a really lovely experience. Other highlights included having a little bit of a play on the new Dreadbox Erebus and Hades, which they are reintroducing as DIY type Eurorack compatible desktop synthesizer voice thingies. It's like their greatest hits coming back in the same sort of mode as the Dysphonia Dysmetria, I don't really know what I'm talking about anymore. However, they were there. I had a great player. I was able to speak to Yanis, which was great. He was there. So that was a superb little bit of excitement. Also got to talk to Nebula about their forthcoming new module, which I'm not allowed to talk about, but that was quite interesting and fits really well with their current lineup. Just really to say that Synthfest was fantastic. It was a great day. It was sold out. They had a few seminars and bits and pieces going on. There's some great performances from electronic music open mic type people and other bits and things going on. And it was just a truly nice, enjoyable day. So that was great. Good job, Sound & Sound, in putting on Synthfest. Now I would like to just throw in that Sheffield is a fair way away, you know, and perhaps we need something a little bit closer to home. And so, as luck would have it, I'm trying to put on a similar sort of event in Norwich. It's going to be next March, 4th of March, a Saturday, just a day, and then an evening. It's going to be a day of synthesizers, modular, getting together, strange performances, weird ideas. A fascinating idea for some kind of weird modular patch off, which is going to happen during the day. It's going to be magnificent. And then in the evening, there's going to be performances from extraordinary people doing extraordinary performances, and it's going to be awesome. So that's next March. I will keep on going on about it as more and more details come together, but it should be an awesome day. It won't be as big as Synthfest, but it will be somehow all the more awesome for being slightly different, for being smaller, more cuddly, more community focused perhaps. And of course I'll be there running the show, so that's the thing, really, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing that's really going to be awesome about this particular event, we think. So moving on, Avid then, my old friend Avid. I fall in and out of love with Avid, and I haven't really spoken to him in a long time, I have to say. I'm sorry guys, I kind of feel like I've moved on to other things, but they've just released a new version of Pro Tools, and along with that comes Pro Tools Intro. Yes, it's in the 2022.9 update, and it is called Pro Tools Intro. So what am I talking about? Well, Pro Tools Intro is the new free version of Pro Tools. Now, Avid have been kicking around this Pro Tools free for a long time. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. It seems like a great idea. Let's get into Pro Tools with this free version, but then it doesn't let you run anything, and you can only do a couple of tracks, and you can only save it in a strange format that has to be online or something, and you can't then use it in a larger, it just kind of, Pro Tools Free was forever shooting itself in the foot by just not being good enough, because there's some great free software out there to do your recording on, a great free studio in all sorts of different places, and it just really wasn't cutting it, and you'd have to try quite hard to convince people that that's the way to go. And also, because Pro Tools is hard. It is hard. It's simply hard. Does that make any sense? The learning curve of getting into it is like, what is it? It's almost as if you need to have a degree in sound engineering just to use Pro Tools in the first place, because it speaks the sort of language that you're supposed to already have acquired, as opposed to introducing you into anything slowly. However, rewind, let's go back and find now that Avid have reworked it, have pulled it out of kind of the core of Pro Tools rather than making it a separate thing, and are now offering us an introductory version to Pro Tools, which looks on the surface, as deep as I've looked at it, to be half decent. You still don't get a lot. You got 8 tracks of audio, 8 tracks of MIDI, and 8 tracks of instruments, so potentially, what's that, 16, 24 tracks of something. But that's something, and it will support up to 4 simultaneous inputs and outputs, so you do have a little bit of multi-track. You could theoretically, if you're really careful, kind of record a band, which is something. It comes with a bunch of sounds through their Expand virtual instrument, but perhaps more importantly is that it actually now supports AAX plugins. It supports its own format of plugins. Can you believe it? The other version, the first version, you couldn't load anything other than the couple of plugins it came with. Whereas now you have access to all of the stuff that's available for AAX from third parties, from Avid, from anywhere you like. And that is absolutely key. Pro Tools itself, of course, gets a few updates in this update, including the sad realization that it goes subscription only. So that's kind of it. You have to be subscribed to it forever if you want to continue using it. So there's that, although they have also built ARA2 support in, which is great. So, you know, swings and roundabouts, pros and cons. If you're a Pro Tools kind of person, I guess you are going to be using it all the time. But the other thing they did, which I'm so excited about, is they've brought back the Mbox. I didn't know that it went away, but apparently it did, but now it's back, and it looks... It doesn't look like anything you've ever seen before in your whole life. What on earth is it? I just don't know what to make of it. I mean, what? What? So you got, I don't know, you got two knobs. What are the two knobs doing? I don't know. I mean, one must be volume, the other one must be volume as well, I suspect. I don't know. But it's a crazy looking. It's definitely going to stand out if you stick one of these on your desk. I mean, I guess it's following the Arturia AudioFuse Studio kind of vibe. A little bit of a console thing with controls on the top. It just looks so spacey. I mean, it lights up purple. This is just crazy town. But apparently it's perfect for everyday, run-of-the-mill, non-Razzmatazz type recording. I think, right, it's got four mic inputs, 4 instrument inputs, a couple of headphone outputs, SB diff, and ADAT, which is going to give it a bump to its total of something like 21 in, 22 out. 21 in? That's an odd number. 8 line in, 6 line out. Phantom power, 24-bit, up to 192, and USB-C. So, great. Super. I mean, just have a look. I mean, it's got metering, it's got buttons on it. I mean, it's either nuts or it's quite fantastic. Can't find out what the 2 buttons do. The 2 big circles do. Okay, 2 large push-turn encoders to adjust gain and volume easily, apparently. Anyway, I'll let you find out what else it does. I just enjoyed the chunky stylings of it and thought, wow, that's the way you make an impression, I think, with a new thing. Just give people stuff to play with and make it look like it doesn't fit anywhere in your studio very nicely at all. That's the way to go about it. PresSonus have introduced Studio One 6. Yes, a brand new version of Studio One. I've enjoyed Studio One for many years now, and I enjoy it because it's a fantastic piece of audio recording and MIDI production software, but it's also full of these tiny little quirks, and you could almost say flaws, which are just so much fun to poke a little finger in. It manages to have this vibe of competency, but also of just flying by the seat of their pants all at the same times, and I enjoy it. I identify with it greatly. So while I'm enjoying its ability to to take me through a channel strip and how to work with that and how to do patterns and interesting things within the MIDI environment and the audio environment, I can also poke fun at the smallest tiny weeniness of the icons and some of the words that they use and the way their workflow talks about things sometimes. It's just an overall enjoyable experience. And version 6 brings in some more stuff, which is both fabulous and slightly funny. So lyrics then. It's brought in a lyrical engine. Now lyrics have been around for forever. I remember probably in Cakewalk Express version 3 you could have lyrics printed out on a score sheet and something like that. But for Studio One this is a new thing. And when they do something new and when they acquire something new from somewhere else that somebody else used to do that they then bundle up and present as being something brand new, they like to do it differently and integratedly. And that's the key, I think, to Studio One, is the way everything integrates, meshes really, really nicely. So what does it mean? Well, you get a lyric track at the top of your arrange page and you can just type your lyrics in. Or you can drag in a text file and it will put them in automatically. Just throw them around and then you can sort of push them around to where you want them to be, because ultimately you want them to be on the place where they're supposed to be, I suppose. Then you can bring up a display, and the display will show you the lyrics as you reach them in your project and highlight them, a bit like a karaoke machine, which is why I use that reference. But it's unlikely that you'd be running Studio One while doing karaoke, so that doesn't really make any sense. So it's not a useful comparison. However, if you've got a vocalist in to sing something, then having the words come up like that can be extremely useful. I mean, of course, you know, every session that you do, the vocalist has produced these lyrics that are born out of their very soul, and so of course they remember them all. But if you've just got a mate in to sing some stuff, then why hold a piece of paper that will rattle on the microphone when you can have the words actually coming up as they're ready to be sung? And you can even offset it so they highlight before they come up, if that makes sense. But it's nicer than that. It's not just putting in lyrics. The lyric list of lines then becomes a way of navigating through the project. So if your vocalists go, yeah, can we go from the ooh ah bit, and you go, all right, ooh ah, you click on that and it takes you to the right place in the project, rather than having to know exactly where that is. Is it chorus 1? Is it chorus 2? I don't know, verse 1 halfway through? Who knows? But they want to go from a particular line. That's very, very easy. Just click on it and it takes you there in the project. Brilliant. It's also integrated into the piano roll editor, where it can chop it up into absolute syllables per note. It appears in the automation lane at the bottom, you know, where you usually get your velocity stalks, and you can enter lyrics there. You can also enter it in the score editor, where you can print it out. Fantastic. And then of course it can also go to the show page, where you can have it as displayed lyrics for your band when you perform. So it really has been deeply baked into the software, and I really like that. I like that a lot. Now, I've written a full review of Studio One 6 for Sound on Sound magazine, which will be out in a month or two, so do go and check that out. But other new things, a video track, great. You can now put video in it and move the clips around, so it's not just a player window, you've now got a track, so you can move clips around and trim them a little bit. Also extract the audio, but that's about it. It's got a new vocoder plugin, a new de-esser plugin, a few upgrades to other bits and pieces. But on the whole, it's not a huge update. It's not a lot of stuff. There's some good stuff. It's not a lot of stuff. So it's one of those on the edge type upgrades where you kind of feel a little bit... It doesn't feel particularly chunky. But, you know... the other thing PresSonus do very well is they do incremental upgrades between the big versions, where they bring in a lot of features along the way. So I think there's probably a lot more stuff to come that we haven't seen yet. Oh, the other big thing within number 6 is the ability to completely remove all of the toolbars you don't normally use, because it does get crowded in there. There's a lot of stuff going on within Studio One, and it can often get a bit overwhelming. You've got this transport bar that's like this wide. What is all that stuff on there? Well, now you can take all that out and minimize it so it just looks like a copy of GarageBand, which is great. It just keeps you more focused and just move all of the crap out of the way and just use the stuff you want to use, which is pretty cool. So Studio One 6, I will continue writing workshops on it, and I'm reviewing it for Sound on Sound, and we'll go forward and see what it's all about. But my experience of it is generally that it feels really good. It feels really competent. It feels very mature, and I'm always looking forward to more updates as they go. Now, the Bastl Softpop SP2 is a weird desktop synthesizer. Got a whole load of patching and stuff going on, and is capable of creating extraordinary noises, usually through weird and unexpected routings. But they've upgraded it and somehow added another oscillator, which I don't quite understand. It's like the original had an analog triangle core oscillator in there, just minding its own business, doing its own thing, and somehow through firmware they've added an entire digital oscillator. How does that work? But somehow it comes with 8 new waveforms and wave shaping, and of course massively extends the tonal possibilities of the Softpop SP2. Because you've just gone from making analog noisy sounds to making I'm making digital sounds, or I'm combining the two, I'm modulating one into the other and doing other things. It's like somehow crafting in an entirely new synthesizer engine. Extraordinary. I mean, it's a free update to anyone who owns an SP2 already, and so off you go, make new sounds. The other thing they've done is they've released the final version, they're saying, of the Microgranny. What's the Microgranny? Well, the Microgranny is this weird little granular sampling kind of synthesizer. It used to come in a funny little plastic box that you could make yourself, I think. and you sort of sample into it, and then it slices it and grains it about the place, and you have 6 things in, and you sample that and slice and move about between them. Simple, fun, sort of an on-the-go, portable and instant sort of fun synth sampler thing. Well, now they've reworked it into becoming the Monolith. I don't know what the relevance of that is, but it's a new version of the Microgranny that essentially comes in a much nicer looking box, the sort of box that they've been doing for their other products more recently. So kind of a more mature, more professional looking version. So ultimately it's cool, granular sampling, slicing, beat making, reversing, tuning, slapping, triggering, kind of weirdness, all in a rather nice looking box. A new software, an entirely original software synthesizer from Cherry Audio. Rather than emulating something else, which they do a lot of, this is one of their own. This is called Signs. It's quite interesting. It's quite interesting. It's a polyphonic software synthesizer, starting off essentially with a whole bunch of sine waves. It has an organ vibe to it, where you kind of feel these different flutes coming in, these different organ sounds, these different sine waves, which you can pitch an octave about the place, that just come in as this really nice organ-esque playable sound. But then that's only really the start of things. So you start with these 4 sine wave oscillators, and then you route them through this wavy interface which bends and folds, combines, adds and subtracts all this stuff together into a bunch of really interesting and modulatable sound sources. That then goes through your regular subtractive architecture of filter and VCA and envelopes and all that kind of rigmarole. But the interesting stuff really forms around these 4 oscillators, because the stuff that you can do in modulation, in moving them about, in bending and shaping these waveforms is just quite lovely. What's nice about it is that each oscillator has this row of stuff, this wavy row of stuff that's going on, that's always reflected in the little oscilloscope display at the end. So as you fold, as you phase shift, as you flip things upside down, that's all being shown. And then you can use that waveform and either combine it together, mix them together to form other waveforms, or use one of those as modulation for one of the others. It can very quickly turn into 4-operator FM, if you so wish, or additive, if you so wish, or just modulating the heck out of each other just for the fun of it. The interface looks complicated. I mean, I'm often critical of Cherry Audio's interfaces because they tend to be a little bit kind of on the 20 years ago kind of drab side. But in this case, you know, they're still not going particularly photorealistic with anything. It still has a dated look to the interface, I think. But it's busy because there's a lot of things that you can do, and Cherry Audio essentially wants to give you access to everything. So there's nothing in a menu behind the scenes that you're having to access. Everything is there, which means that every oscillator you can detune against another. You can see what's going on. You can see what the knobs are being modulated to or being changed to, and you can compare each one as you go. And it makes for a very detailed, a very cerebral experience, because you can make these adjustments and instantly see how they are affecting everything else. And that's worth a little bit of complexity in the interface, I think. The presets in there are fantastic and really do show off the range of what's possible. There's a fantastic arpeggiator in here, which is doing all sorts of modulating and changing and rhythmic things. There's chords, there's pads, there's synth lines. There's like a fun house of synthesizer-ness was in this synth. It's not trying to sound like anything in particular. It just has this thickness and meatiness to it, which is just thoroughly enjoyable. Just enjoying the way that those oscillators play with each other. It means so often you have a synthesizer that, you know, you have a patch, the oscillators is not really what you're interested in. You're interested in the filter and the stuff afterwards. But with this, because you can tune these oscillators against each other, use them against one another in some form of cross modulation, that all the fun actually happens there. And it feels different. It's giving you a different approach to how you're generating your sounds. So once you've been through the presets, you can just spend time. And I recommend spending time purely on those oscillators as sine waves and just seeing where it takes you. It's really great. I like it a lot. You'll find my full review of that one on the Gear News website. Now, if you saw my video on the Moog Mavis, you may have noted that I pointed something out put it at a deep flaw in their planning with the layout of the patch sockets on the Moog Mavis compared to something like the Mother 32, in that they, rather than having anything on the right like they have with all of their 60 HP synths, so that they sit nicely in a rack and you can patch on one side and it doesn't get in the way of all the knobs, the Mavis came in and was patched on the left. So if you attempted to put that in the same 60 HP rack, it would have to go, all the cables go across each other, and you think, well, that's an odd thing to do. Then some bright spark pointed out that, so they can sit in there, it can sit alongside a Mother 32 in the 104 HP case, because Moog did his 104 HP boat. I've got a whole stack of them. And you go, okay, so that's nice. Put in your Mother 32, you put in your Mavis, there's no room for a power supply, because the Moog cases aren't powered. There's no power supply, it's not going to work. So it's a complete, like, ball drum. Just ain't gonna work. So there we go. That was, in my view, that seemed to be like a bit of a weird mistake to make. But interestingly, it wasn't a mistake after all, because shortly afterwards along came a new version of the Moog 104 HP modular row case thing with a built-in internal power supply. So this now means that you plug in things in the back, and you can put in your 60 HP Mother 32, your 40 HP Moog Mavis, and they sit perfectly next to each other. Job done. And I believe if I hadn't have pointed that out quite so strongly, they never would have done it. It never would have occurred to them. But it has. They listened to me. The influence that I have has enabled us to have a decent row of Moog with a power supply built in. Awesome. You can now run it without having to have a separate power supply, which, it doubles the price of the case more often than not. Now, it ain't perfect, of course. You only get about 10 ports. Is 10 ports enough for 104 HP? It just about is. Just about, I would say. I think they're just about getting away with it. The other slight thing is that they haven't put a DC through on the back. So if you've got a 3-tier Moog cases, they will need a power supply for each one, which is a bit of a pain. A bit of a pain, but like I say, obviously I didn't stress that in my video, which is why they didn't include it, because they're just listening to me and hanging on to every word I said. And if I don't mention these things explicitly, then of course they're not going to turn up. But anyway, don't have any pricing yet, sadly, so they could be massively expensive. But let's hope they're under 200 quid. Because the original 104 HP case without a power supply is about 100, and usually a power supply module to put in with flying bus cables tends to be around 100 quid, can be a lot more. So it would be good, it would be excellent if it was 150, but we shall see. Following hot on the heels of the Trinity, Modbap have another new module that they're kind of sneaking out. It's called Hue. Hue as in colour hue, as opposed to the bloke Hue. Or who are you talking about? Talking about something to do with colour. It's essentially an audio colouring and texturising module. It has a chain of 5 effects. We're talking about a drive, filter, tape saturation, some kind of lo-fi thing, and a bit of compression. It's just really simple, chunky way of adding some solid, gritty, lo-fi type colorization to your sound. There you go. 4 knobs, turn them all up, compression at the bottom, something goes in, crunchiness, bigness, fatness, saturatedness comes out the other end. Simple, awesome, fat. It's just the sort of thing that Modbap are brilliant at. 1010 Music have produced a new colour of their Nanobox, little boxes of fizz and funness. This one is a bit more of a groove box. It's in pink. I don't have one, evidently, but it's full of samples and drum machines and drum sequencing using that touchscreen to be able to stick in notes on a pattern generating kind of format. You get 8 pads on screen, you get 8 tracks up to 64 steps, and you just go to town either tapping them in a kind of a touch screen pad playing experience. I mean, that's not the most awesome thing in the world, but you can always connect a MIDI controller to it or whatever, or just tap to program the patterns and let that take care of the playing of the beats. All the sounds are created with a couple of FM oscillators and a sample. You can sample directly in and splash that across it, or you can use the weird digital oscillators inside to craft and sound design your own bits of fizz and bubble within the box. It then has the same kind of effects and modulation architecture of the other boxes, with a bit of filtering, that kind of thing all built in. I mean, it sits brilliantly with the lemon drop and the firebox, fire dragon thing, the red one and the yellow one. Pink one, perfect. You've got, drums and patterns along with your granulars, along with your wavetables. Awesome little collection of stuff. Now, Bitwig ran into a bit of trouble last month by having this brainstorm of an idea, because they've had this way of working where if you buy into their subscription model, you get a lifetime of free upgrades and that kind of thing, which is great, which is one way of doing it. And then they decided that, we'll release something differently, which actually isn't in our lifetime forever and for always bundle. We're going to produce something slightly different and have that as like an opt-in, a premium in-app purchase kind of additional thing. I mean, if we put a lot of work into making some really high-class plugins, we have every right to sell those sort of separately and differently. No, not really, do you? Well, you kind of do. Of course you can. You do what you like. I mean, you do what you like. However, what's happened is that the community kind of kicked up a bit of a fuss, saying that, look, we've been giving you money for updates, and we respect that. We want to invest in our DAW and invest in the development of it, in evolution of it, which is great. And so when you produce new stuff, we kind of get that as part of our deal. We've always assumed. And now you've got this separate thing, which just doesn't seem quite right. If it had been a completely separate product that you could sell to anybody, like a VST plugin, then that would be more understandable. But this is something which only works in Bitwig, is an integral part of Bitwig, and so kind of we feel we should be getting that as part of our deal. So anyway, this argument exploded a bit on the internet. People got a bit upset about it, which is a shame. But these things are important. These are our creative tools, and so we want to believe that the people we are investing our money in for the tools that we use have our best interests at heart. And this felt somehow disingenuous and somehow not really in the spirit of how Bitwig have presented themselves and how we believe them to be a nice bunch of people who operate a nice piece of software. Thankfully, after a little bit of navel gazing and thinking about it for a little bit, they've decided, you're right, it should just be included. And so it is. And what is it that we're actually talking about? We're talking about the Spectral suite. Now, this is a bunch of very clever plugins that do very clever things to the spectral range of spectral audio-ness, of which I have absolutely no interest whatsoever. However, I should have got them, of course, for free for nothing. I don't know. They look great, and yes, they are an integral part of Bitwig, and I agree, they should have been included from the start. But however, Bitwig have thought about it, have rolled back, and I have every respect for them for doing so. And I'm glad that they have, and I hope now we can move forward without that kind of silly shenanigans going on. Last month or the other month, I announced that Future Retro were closing up, shutting down and not doing it anymore. Well, the good news is that that's actually no longer the case. A bunch of people have gotten together, pulled some resources, and kind of bought the whole lot, including kind of the guy behind it to a degree, as in they're using him as a consultant on the project going forward, so that they can continue to roll out things like the vector synth, the controllers that they were doing, and build more stuff into the future. So they're taking the ideas and the emphasis and all of the designs and bringing it back to life, which is awesome. Absolutely awesome. So you can go along to the website and you'll find a little bit of information about that. We don't really know exactly how that's going to pan out quite yet, but it is very exciting to see that enthusiasts and people are out there who are prepared to put the money in to save a company that was otherwise had kind of like had enough. And that's really awesome. I think that's brilliant. Now for something a little bit different is the Centrance Bouncer. Now this looks like some old DI box that knock around on the floor of studios from time to time, but it's actually a 10-channel mixer. An audio analog mixer that you can plug your whole studio kind of into and mix just on a tiny little box. Now, I don't care about its mixing facility. What interests me about this box is the fact that it's a small thing into which you can plug all your stuff and just have it play. Because one of the most difficult things when dealing with Eurorack and desktop synthesizers and all these other bits and pieces is how do you get to hear them without having this massive mixing board getting in the way, knocking around, that you're always going to have access to. I would much rather have something small that I can just plug a couple of things into so that I can hear them without having to faff around, without having to rewire everything, without having to muck about. It looks like this could be that little genius thing. Small, simple, plug into, and the best thing about it is that it has an SD card and you can record directly to it. So if you're doing your doorless jamming, plugged everything in, you just hit record and you're recording what you're doing. Awesome. I mean, it has been commented that it doesn't have a USB port for connection to a computer, so you could then stream multi-track onto your computer, but hey, I don't think that's the point. I think the point is that you're in a computer-free environment. You've just got this box. You've plugged everything in. You can hear it. You can do your jam, have a wonderful time, and record the whole thing. Genius. Absolutely genius. Now, there is a 1010 Music blue box little thing that will do something similar. And I think that's a nice idea too. But what, again, as I say, what I like about this is the fact that it could fall down the back. You know, it could get trampled. It could be at the bottom of your bag, and it looks like it will survive. You're not having to sort of protect it or find a unique place for it. It will just be knocking about and you plug into it whenever you need to. I kind of like that ruggedness of it, so you don't have to be precious about this piece of gear, but it's extremely, extremely useful. Now, if like me you haven't been following the whole GPU audio story, then you'll be surprised to hear that you can now run a proper software synthesizer on your video card. At least I think so. I think that's what it's all about. So the idea is that you use GPU DSP processing power. So your video card, your own video card, your AMD one, I'm not entirely sure. I'll probably find that out in a minute. That you can use that power rather than using your CPU power. It feels like it's something that I've heard about for a long, long time. But anyway, finally it's here and finally there is one. And I'm kind of wondering, are we still running out of CPU cycles? Is that still a problem? Do people have these enormous projects for which they're forever having to freeze stuff and bounce stuff, and so be able to use your graphics card as an extra little bit of DSP is really worthwhile? I don't know. I mean, I guess if you've got it, then you might as well use it, I suppose. So what we have is a software synthesizer, multi-layered polyphonic software synthesizer called Major, and this is in beta version alongside a suite of effects that GPU Audio have also produced. There's something like 8 layers of 8 oscillators and 8 channels of... It's a big synth. It's a serious piece of gear. This is not just mucking about with weird DSP coding and very nerdy stuff. This is a proper software synthesizer with a proper GUI. Of course, you would imagine that it would have. But it's running on your graphics card. Exactly what you need to run it is a little bit unclear at the moment, but they are hopefully releasing the beta version by the end of the year, so we'll be able to have a bit more of a go at it. But it's an interesting development. I'm still kind of on the fence about whether this is something which is going to be awesome, carrying us forward, or whether it's whether our poor old CPUs are actually doing enough. Thanks very much. It feels like every week somebody comes out with a new way of providing control over sound, instrument playing, a new interface, a new controller, a new way of interacting between your fingers, your creativity, and some kind of computer or synthesizer or something. There's various things. You can wave at stuff, you can twist and turn stuff, you can tickle stuff, you have new forms of keyboards, you've got pads and all sorts of bits and pieces. This one is called the Exquis, I think, and it's from a company that previously had produced kind of a MIDI accordion, a button accordion controller that had 2 sides on it for two sets of fingers, which I thought was quite interesting, but obviously very niche for people who play button accordions. Not that many necessarily. But now they've taken that technology and that layout and have produced like a larger flat one with hexagonal pans set out in kind of isomorphic layout, which provides you with super squishy MPE control over your software. So why have a keyboard? Don't need a keyboard. Let's have these squashy buttons which you can play in shapes. Apparently you have chords which shape all the way up and down depending on what they are, and it's the same shape and it lights up to show you what's what's going on. You can introduce scale so that it only plays the notes that you want and it will lead you through, that kind of thing. So all the same sort of innovations that we're forever hearing are really important in MIDI controllers that are not just simply a keyboard that we all understand and know how to play. But I mean, I find this sort of stuff fascinating. I think it's really interesting, and it does offer an expressive way to get those notes into that system that you are trying to do notes and stuff on. It looks great. I like the light upness of it, so it's showing you what to play. I mean, they have a whole educational side to it in order to teach you to play things and teach you about music, which is nice and interesting. It also, I mean, it supports MPE, but it also supports control voltage and can output that for expressive, or at least, you know, on-off gate and pitchness into your modular. The only thing that's slightly quizzical is that it runs with this app, which is very powerful, which has sounds and sequencing and looping and stuff in it, but it kind of has to have that. So you've forever got either a phone or a computer hanging off the end, which is a shame. It kind of looks like it could have an internal looper or sequencer or some way of looping and sequencing loops and instruments. And I think that then would make it slightly more interesting, because at the moment it just feels slightly dragged down by having to have this other device attached to it. But otherwise, I mean, it's fascinating. It's very, very interesting. It's on Kickstarter. Go and check it out. Long time ago, I did a review of the Korg SQ-64. Fabulous review it was, very in-depth. I think I was one of the first people to get something out there on it. I found it a fascinating sequencer, which has a lot of stuff going for it, as well as some serious kind of gaps, some little bits that you just go about. And consequently, it never really became the hardware sequencer of choice in my environment. I thought it might do. It just didn't quite make it, because it was just somehow there was something hard work about it, which was just rubbing me up the wrong way. Recently, I would say 6 months ago, Korg got in touch to say, so what would you like to see in an update to the SQ-64? And I gave them a nice long list. This, and this. And it looks a lot like they've listened to me on the whole, I think. And so there's a new update, version 2 for the SQ-64, and it really does fill in a lot of those holes. The first, I think the biggest hole, was there was no real step entry. There was no step recording mode. You could select a step and dial in the pitch for it, then select the next step, dial in the pitch for it. Yes, that would work. But you couldn't just hit record and put in a bunch of steps. You now can. Oh yes, you now can. So that's that SH101 style of sequencing, where you just go, no, step, no, rest, tie, no, step, and it's done. Fantastic. That is, I think, probably revolutionized it, because it just seems so difficult to record a sequence. I mean, you could record a sequence, but you felt you were stuck between either having to do one thing, one note, or record something live. They've also sorted out the quantization for recording, so recording live is now less troublesome, and they now let you edit the notes much simpler as well, which again was a problem. I seem to find myself having to re-record my performance rather than just go in and tweak something. So there's been a number of improvements, and another one is the shift button. There's a whole load of stuff available under the shift button, where you can change the way the sequence is working, the direction, the backwards and forwards. You can mute tracks and all sorts of things, but you had to hold the bloody button in order to do it. Now you can latch it. Of course, what a no-brainer of an update to do. You can now latch it and get straight into all those sorts of bits and pieces. So it's a decent, worthy update. I plan to do a new video on it, actually, because I think it's worth pointing out all the new features, and hopefully the workflow will just gel that little bit better, make it smoother, feel nicer, because it's a good machine. It's got a lot of good stuff going for it, and this update looks like it could sort out a few things. Oh yeah, you can now play the pads to play different drums, which is something you couldn't do before. Again, why could you not do that before? But hey, updates are great. So the SQ-64 is being breathed some new life into it through the version 2 update. Nice. Arturia then. Oh yes, they had a new synth. Definitely had a new synth. How do we know they had a new synth? because there are a bazillion YouTube videos about it from a bazillion cool YouTubers talking about their new synth, me included. I mean, I didn't actually receive the synth until after it was officially announced, so I was able to sneak in something afterwards, just for fun, you understand? But I will, at some point, sit down with it and give it a really good review. I think that would be worthwhile, I think, once the dust has settled a little bit. So what is it? Well, it's essentially a properly polyphonic version of the Microfreak. It's called the Minifreak. It's a nice looking, I quite like the look of it. I mean, it's a bit different, a bit square and interesting, but I like it. It appeals to me. I like the difference of it. It has some interesting arpeggiation and sequencing in it, some interesting control stuff. Obviously, we've now lost the touch plate keyboard, which, in my view, was horrible, absolutely horrible on the Microfreak. And now we've got a proper mini-isk type small keyboard, but what that means is that it just plays like a synth. So when you start to play it, you've got 6 voices of polyphony, and you can enjoy playing it like it's a proper synthesizer. It no longer feels like an experiment. The Microfreak always felt experimental. I'm doing weird, quirky stuff, aren't I interesting and stuff. Really interesting I am. Whereas now it feels like, oh, a nice pad, oh, a nice bit of keys, oh, a nice bit of something interesting, oh, filter, nice. They have changed the filter. It's no longer the Steiner filter. I don't know. The other one they had is no longer that. It's now a SEM filter. So it's a bit sort of softer and warmer, I think, in the filtering department. But otherwise, essentially what you're getting is a polyphonic braids, polyphonic plats from Mutable Instruments. So all of those digital, interesting oscillators, but presented in a more luxuriously polyphonic way. And I think that's very interesting. There's a lot of difference in there because you've got these parameters that you can change within each chosen sound source oscillator, and you've got 2 oscillators with which to do this with. You have 2 different sounds going on together at the same time across your 6 voices. You can also go 12 voice if you're then quite happy to have 12 voice, not 12 voice, but 12 note polyphony with the voices articulated paraphonically. Is that the right way of saying it? I'm not entirely sure. But essentially you don't get a filter for every voice like you do with the 6 voices. So it's cool, it's nice. I'm going to get into it. It's been compared a lot to the Hydrasynth Explorer. Yeah, I've got one of those too. I've got a few synths at the moment that I really need to sit down with and work through. And I will endeavour to do that this month. I think that would be good. But that wasn't the only thing that Arturia had cooking on this release day. They also had a new version of the Minilab, which is their controller keyboard, which looks quite nice. They had an extended version of their Minifuse, which is their audio interface. This is the 4-channel one. They've got a 1, a 2, and now a 4, which is nice. The 4 for me is always the sweet spot. I think it just gives you that little bit of extra versatility. And finally, they've got a grand piano, an augmented grand piano from their augmented range of software instruments, which is quite interesting. I quite like their augmented stuff. I quite like the choirs and the strings that they did, because what it sort of does is gives you, a good basis of orchestral and familiar sounds, and then twists the heck out of them. And it's the sort of thing that I would do myself. Like with a grand piano, I take a nice grand piano sound, and then I dump a whole load of effects and weirdness on it to give it some strangeness. And that's kind of what augmented grand piano is doing. They're doing that for you and just giving you a couple of macro knobs to really enjoy the weirdness of that sound. So I think it's really, really hard to do some kind of sample-based instrument that feels different. And I think Arturia are somehow managing to manage it with these augmented ones. 4MS has had a bit of a bumper time with some new modules. They've done something interesting to their shuffling clock thingy called the CMM Plus, Shuffling Clock Multiplier Plus. What they've done is taken the shuffling clock, which is their clock that shuffles, and added the expander into a single module. So you've got all that control voltage, access to the weird rotational, shuffling, grooving, skipping, muting, and other cool things you can do with their clock. Clocks are always very interesting. You can do fascinating things with them, and with this SCM Plus, you've essentially got a rhythm engine within it. We can create not just shuffling and grooving rhythms, but all sorts of speeds and tempos and movements and stuff coming out of it, so it could actually run an entire drum section all by itself. They've also got a new pingable envelope generator, a mini one that used to be quite a chunky module, whereas this is a much smaller version of that, which is essentially a clock synced envelope which gets excited by pings. It can produce all sorts of shapes and all sorts of divisions and all sorts of multiples of different clocks and pings. So ping comes in, sends stuff out of all sorts of shapes and sizes. They also have a very interesting looking envelope VCA module in sort of 3 sizes, like a singular jewel and a quad. No, it's a singular jewel and a jewel with shaping or something. Not a whole lot of information on that just yet. That just seems to have popped up as something that that's coming along. But it's looking a bit West Coasty. Well, I shouldn't say that these days, with its rise and fullness going on. Lots of cycles, lots of triggers, lots of wave shapes, and a ton of CV control. Synths has now completed their educational DIY system with Moritz Klein and has now released it as an entire buildable modular system. It is this fella here, this thing over here. I finished it the other night on my live stream about the wavefolder. We did it, soldered it together and played with it for a bit, and it was really great. It was better. I mean, it's better than the sum of its parts. It's one of those things where you think, oh, this is quite basic, but as it starts to develop, it flourishes and blossoms into this really interesting tunable and tonable machine of modular goodness. It's really, really nice. They've done a fantastic job on it. It's been an interesting journey going from when we started back in January. They've released a module every month, and here we are 10 months later with an entire system. It's been great. It's been great. I love the quality of it. I love the documentation that Moritz Klein has provided in order to help us learn about circuit design and how these things work. When you start building them out on a breadboard first, you start to really understand what it is that's going on, that's creating the tones and the shaping and the electricity that we use within our synthesizers. It's just brilliant. And Moritz has been extraordinarily patient with me as I've bumbled through these projects in my live streams and found them sometimes too challenging, sometimes difficult, but it's always been enlightening. It's always been fascinating. And at the end, we have these amazing modules which come out that we can make music with. It's superb. I think the whole kit's about €600 or something, which for a 9-module modular system with case and power supply is pretty good value. Pretty good value. And it's going to take you a week to build, I should think, if you really stick at it. But, you know, a series of evenings, fantastic. You know, I found I could breadboard one in 2 to 3 hours and then build it in 2 to 3 hours. But I think if you take some time, if you really delve into the manuals and the resources that are there, you can learn a heck of a lot. Akai has a new MBK Mini out called the Mini Plus. The Mini Plus, what's the plus bit? The plus bit is sequencing and CV and gate outputs. Quite interesting. The Akai MPK is just a little mini MIDI controller. It's got MPC pads on it. It's got this weird joystick thing, but it has a bunch of knobs that can be assignable over MIDI and has so far just been USB and MIDI to control things. However, now they've built in an arpeggiator and a sequencer, and people are suggesting that it's going to give the Keystep 37 a run for its money. Interesting. The thing I like about the Keystep is its simplicity. Got one here, look. It's always there, always ready to go. It doesn't actually have a whole load of knobs. I don't ever use this or this. I just use the sequencer and arpeggiator. CV gate out the back, plug in the stuff, and I've instantly got something going on. That's all I'm using it for. And it's heavy. It's good. It's not going to break, it's not going to fall apart. The Akai MPK, if it's like the other MPKs that I've tried, it's going to be a bit plasticky. It's going to feel like that, and perhaps it looks like it feels more at home in front of your computer than it does in front of your modular. However, building in CV and gate does give you that option. So maybe it could be something different. You have 2 polyphonic tracks. I mean, being polyphonic is of no use to your modular. That's only good if you're using it via MIDI. But, you know, it's a nice thing in that regard. And you can record in step time or real time. But the thing is, it only has the one CV gate a modulation output. So it's no different. It may have an internal sequencer for MIDI, which is great, which is interesting. It just is not really emphasizing what it has over the Keystep 37 in terms of CV gate. Kind of like has the same. But on the other hand, you could see it as being part of your doorless jamming situation where you can be sequencing something via MIDI while sequencing something else via CV gate. So that's a possibility. So those sorts of things are interesting, I think. I think ultimately that any MIDI controller that comes out now needs to have CV and gate outputs. I think it should be standard. It should not be something which is a surprise or something that's of note. It should be the standard these days. And so Akai are really just catching up with that. All the other paraphernalia on it is good MIDI control, MIDI performance stuff. It doesn't really translate into any of this, but then you don't really need it to. All you need it to do is to kick out decent notes and gates and rhythms so that you can then play with the sound generation and sound design within your modular. And maybe the MPK Mini Plus does that. And finally, Moog has released a whole bunch of their Moogerfooger. Of course they're Moogerfooger, aren't they? Not Moogerfooger. I've always assumed they're a Moogerfooger, but they're not, they're Moogerfooger. How interesting. Or maybe they're Moogerfooger. The Moogerfooger pedals. They are now available as a VST plugin. There have been some vague memory in the past of some Pro Tools ones, but these is a selection of 7 that will run on any VST platform, and they're great. They're just good. I mean, there's nothing extraordinary about the sort of effects that they're offering, but at the same time, they're different. They just have this vintage vibe, either in the look or in the sound, maybe both, probably both. They sound sort of crunchy and together in a really nice way. When you've got a filter, but you're not just turning on a filter, it has an envelope follower, so it's pulling the envelope of the audio you're putting in and using that to control the filter. So you're not having to add a separate envelope in, and that's interesting. I mean, you can plug any old rubbish into it and it's going to act like you're enveloping the filter. It's got a ring modulator, which is a little bit more uncommon, which gives really interesting sounds that you can just make it sound completely nuts. It has this oscillator, frequency generator thing that I have no idea what the heck you're supposed to do with that. But then it's got a fantastic chorus phaser, it's got a delay, it's got something else that I can't... Oh yeah, it's got a sort of a stepped sequence filter thing. Which is interesting. It's just a nice, gritty bunch of regular effects plugins that you can instantly use in any sorts of situation. It had one particular special feature, and that's that you could connect the plugins to each other. Now these are separate plugins that you run in a separate instance, but as soon as you run 2, the modulation of one becomes available to the other one, and you can patch it in like you could with the actual pedals, because the actual pedals had CV ins and outs that you could patch between them to create these routings of modulation, and you can do that within the software, which I've never seen before, and that's really quite interesting. Really quite interesting. So I mean, they're fun. Go and try them out. They're really good, meaty, decent plugins. So there you go. That'll do, I think, for this month. That'll do us. That's plenty. And of course, I have plenty of stuff coming up. Always endless things of coming up. I'm trying to engineer a week of DIY in November. That's my plan. Definitely a plan, because I need to do a bit of Descartes' Dream. I need to get that almost over the finish line, and I've got a number of really interesting kits that I have ready to go that I'd like to do some videos on. So I'm going to have a bit of that coming up soon, I think. I've also got a whole bunch of reviews of lots of interesting modules and synthesizers that I want to do a load of stuff on, so that's good. I also have a very special release this month of November, and that is my first module. So that's just so exciting. It's going to be probably somewhere between the 15th and 18th of November. We haven't got an exact release date yet, but what I'll do is a live stream demonstrating the module, what it does. It'll take about 2 minutes, and talk to Berfaco, who I'm making it with, and Mano will hopefully be on the stream where we'll talk to him about it, and we'll have a good old time just checking it out and seeing what it does. And then it should be, with a bit of luck, available to buy. It's very exciting. I'm totally excited and bowled over by the whole concept. Although we started talking about it years ago. and now we're actually here where we have a real life actual product. It's very exciting. I hope you enjoy it as much as I've enjoyed putting it together and playing with it. So that's to come. But plenty of other stuff, I'm sure, that will be, who knows what will happen. So that's cool. I hope that's been alright and interesting and helpful. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.